Have you ever heard the phrase, every man for himself? Of course you have, and I bet you know what it means. When I hear this phrase, I can't help but picture a competitive game of musical chairs. The goal is to be the last one standing, or sitting, in order to win a prize. And if you ever see a competitive game of musical chairs, you'll see people push each other out of the way, throw elbows, push people, play dirty, and make fools of themselves, all in hopes of winning, like a little cupcake or something. You see a similar sort of thing on Black Friday. It's the day after Thanksgiving when stores have crazy sales to kick off the holiday shopping season. Every year on the news following Black Friday, there are stories of broken bones or police needing to be called because a fist fight erupted in an aisle of Walmart over who got to the last big screen TV first. I mean, if you aren't there and you're just watching it all unfold, it's super entertaining. I mean, pop some popcorn and get comfortable because you're in for quite a treat. I mean, it's every man for himself, and it's bonkers. I mean, well, we all know what it feels like to be in an every man for himself or every woman for herself type of situation. It may not have been over a game of musical chairs or a new TV on Black Friday, but in a lot of ways, high school feels that way, like an every man for himself situation. And to help you think about it, let me just give you some scenarios. You and your friend like the same girl, so you go to crazy lengths to fight for her attention. May the best man win. You fight for seats in the cafeteria, for the closest spot to the lunch line, trash can, or guy you're low-key stalking. Okay. You fight for first chair in the band, creating a totally dramatic storyline between you and your competition. You fight for starting spots on the team or starring roles in the play. Or at home, it's a fight between your siblings or step-siblings for the remote or the bathroom or the car. I mean, you have plenty of opportunities to look out for yourself in high school. In fact, in some ways, it might feel like you're always in a fight for something and fending for yourself. Maybe it feels like you're trying to look out for yourself because it doesn't feel like anyone else is doing it. For the past few weeks, we've been talking about how Jesus wants us to be free people, but that most days we don't really feel that way. I mean, we feel anything but free. We feel bound by rules or limited by managing our image, and sometimes our own actions and choices limit us. How are we supposed to feel free when we're always in a fight for our place in line, our place at school, our place on the team, our place in our own families? Are we really free people if we're constantly having to watch our back and look out for ourselves? I mean, are we really free if we're trying to keep tabs on how everyone else is doing, how we measure up, and where we rank? Is that freedom? Is that living the best kind of life we can live? I mean, if we're being honest, sometimes it feels like we're trapped. It feels like we're being controlled and out of control at the same time. It feels like our lives are small and cramped, constantly trying to keep our place in line and keep others from walking all over us. And that definitely doesn't feel like freedom. The past couple of weeks, we've spent time looking at one of the books of the Bible, which isn't actually a book at all, but a letter. It's a letter from the Apostle Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament to a church in Galatia. Now, Paul wrote all of his letters under specific circumstances unique to each church. And for the church in Galatia, his reason for writing was one he felt just a little bit passionate about. Paul had taught them the gospel, which was a name for referencing what Jesus did for us on the cross. Paul helped start this church based on how Jesus had made the relationship between them and God right. But then a group of teachers came around after Paul and told these new Christians that there was actually more to it than what Paul had said. We talked about this in week 1 of the series, how they believed there were certain commands from the Jewish law that needed to be obeyed in order for the Galatians to be considered true followers of Jesus. So Paul was upset about that because he knew that Jesus wanted people to be free. He didn't want these new Christians to be controlled by a set of rules. So the entire letter to the Galatians is written with this disagreement in mind, because Paul knew that when you let yourself begin to think you need to work for God's love and God's approval and God's grace, you start to see people differently. And when that happens, you don't see other people as those who have received the same grace you have, but instead as competitors working for the same thing. And before too long, you do start living like every man for himself. Listen to what Paul says about this. For you have been called to live in freedom, my brothers and sisters, but don't use your freedom to satisfy your sinful nature. Instead, use your freedom to serve one another in love. In other words, your freedom isn't just about you. Your freedom is connected to other people. Paul drives the message of freedom again and again in this letter. He is determined to make sure the Galatians don't forget this. But he also knows the tendency we all have to take our freedom and abuse it, to benefit ourselves, to improve our standing, to make ourselves look the best, and to operate like it's every man for himself. So then what are you to do instead? I mean, Paul would say, use your freedom to serve one another in love. He goes on saying this, for the whole law can be summed up in this one command, love your neighbor as yourself. It's a great move by Paul to say this, because remember, this was a group of people being told there was more law for them to obey in order to actually be followers of Jesus. So Paul sort of put it all on the table. You say there's more to the law they need to obey? I say the whole law is summed up with loving each other. Mic drop. But Paul wasn't just trying to make a point. I mean, he really believed the whole law was summed up in this command to love each other. He believed it because that's literally something Jesus said. Paul goes on to say, but if you are always biting and devouring one another, watch out. Beware of destroying one another. In other words, there's more on the line than just your freedom. I mean, there's the health and wholeness and happiness of other people on the line. And when we don't use our freedom for good, when we forget the freedom we have, we begin to live and behave in a way that's every man for himself. And that's dangerous. You can use your freedom for anything. I mean, the choice is yours. You can use it to love people or hurt people. But what Paul is saying is, the way God sees you is not at risk because of your behavior or from following or not following any law. I mean, that doesn't make your decision on how you use your freedom any less important, and it doesn't mean there aren't consequences to how you use your freedom. I mean, sure, you may be free to talk about others, the things that bother you and annoy you and make you so angry. You may be free to judge the good or bad behavior of others. You may be free to tear each other down, bringing attention to the way others are doing it wrong. You may be free to make fun of each other or laugh at each other, but not without consequences. It will cost you, and it will cost others, and it will eventually destroy you and them. Because in this every man for himself way of thinking of tearing others down to make yourself look better, you are hurting them and also hurting yourself. It's hurting your ability to love others. And the truth is, your freedom is connected to their freedom. And real freedom is found in loving others. You don't want to live in a world where no one looks out for the other. I mean, you can use your freedom for something better. You can live in the freedom Jesus gave you and use your freedom to serve each other, putting an end to the every man for himself way of life. So if my freedom is connected to putting others first, instead of fending for myself, how can I fend for someone else? I mean, maybe that feels impossible or illogical because it goes against everything our instinct tells us. I mean, if we aren't looking out for us, who is? But that's why Paul says living in this kind of freedom comes from God, because putting others first isn't easy and it isn't our natural response. But that's what God wants for us. That's where we'll find freedom. Freedom from the drive to be perfect by following all the rules like we talked about in week 1. Freedom from trying to win the approval of others like we talked about in week 2. Freedom from the fear of consequences in the future like we talked about in week 3. Freedom from fighting for our rights and putting ourselves first like we're talking about right now. Instead, we can use our freedom for others. Try it. Try putting the needs of someone else before your own. We have nothing to prove, so we don't have to look out for ourselves. We can look out for others. That's freedom. So let them cut in line at lunch. Let them get the most attention on the sports field. Let them get credit on the school project. Let them get the better spot on the team or in the band. Let them have what they need because we already have what we need. In other words, what we're ultimately saying today is, free people put others first. Loving others is what matters, Paul says, and loving others will lead to freedom. I know this may sound impossible. I know the idea of finding freedom by doing things for others seems like it doesn't make sense. But what if you committed to just trying this out for a day or maybe a week? What might happen in your school or your family or your friend group if you decided to use your freedom to lift others up? How would it change the way you saw one another? How would it change the emotional temperature of a room? I mean, think about it on the flip side. What if you experienced someone putting you first? You know how great that feels. So imagine if everyone here decided to make it a goal to put others first. There would be more peace, less worry, and more freedom.